May 1940. Self-confident Wehrmacht tankers stumble upon the Caterpillar fortress near Stonne and the La Ferté fortification. One tank and a defense unit disrupted the pace of the Blitzkrieg, but could not save France then. May of the 40th began for the German tank units on a note of confidence, close to arrogance. The Polish campaign fixed a simple formula in the troops. Speed plus communication and air support break any stationary front faster than the enemy has time to give the next order. The companies repeated that the radio in each tank is more important than an extra millimeter of armor, and interaction with aviation saves barrels of fuel and hours on the ground. Confidence became not only a fighting spirit, but also an operating attitude. The new organization of the battle corresponded to this psychological attitude. Tanks break through and bypass. Motorized infantry secure and clean. Sappers open passages. Diving aircraft extinguish resistance nodes and disrupt counterattacks. In the regimental schedules, it looked like a pre-composed score of fire and movement. In reality, she worked thanks to the little things. Short radio commands, standards of marching discipline, and the platoon commander's habit of making decisions in minutes. Anyone who got inside this machine began to believe that the scheme would work everywhere. The plan for the spring operation reinforced this feeling. The Allies were supposed to be drawn into Belgium, and the main attack was to be carried out through the Ardennes. That is, where the enemy considered a major mechanized advance unlikely. The topography, which had been mistaken for a barrier in the previous war, was now interpreted as a test of speed and flexibility. It was believed that traffic jams, destroyed bridges, and narrow streets could be overcome with standard sets. Paving stones, smoke, sapper charges, detours through secondary roads. Within the panzer divisions, self-confidence had specific everyday forms. The column marched by the hour. Refueling was planned by points. Security was distributed by a grid of short tasks, and company commanders conducted the battle as a dialogue on the air. The radio network turned platoons into a swarm that could break up, suddenly close up and change the axis of impact without a long paper correspondence. During the exercises and in Poland, this had an impressive effect. The enemy was late in reacting, which meant that new corridors for maneuver opened up on the map. From above, the chronicle of successes fueled confidence. The press bureau showed continuous columns, over which it always seemed to be hanging things. There was a sense of technological predestination. Since the attack relies on radio communications and aviation, it means that any frontier will collapse under the right combination of pace and impact from the sky. There were indeed many places in the Allied trenches where this picture literally came true. But where the terrain and the preparation of the defense coincided successfully, the picture suddenly distorted. Noise, smoke, cramped streets, and short lines broke the picture. Gelba's strategic plan worked successfully in the early days. On the 10th of May, the columns moved in several directions at once, raising panic and hiding the main blow. While the Anglo-French forces were turning north, the strike groups were moving deeper into the Ardennes, reaching the crossings and gathering everything they needed to throw to the west. The key principle remained the same: not to argue with the relief, but to rewrite it in your favor. If the bridge survives, cross. If it is destroyed, point. If the crossing is overloaded, change the aiming point. The danger was that the habit of pace masked the real risks. Routine delays on the narrow road turned into chain stops. One tank hit on the bridge blocked the convoy for hours. Smoke from burning houses clogged the airwaves, and the radio network lost transparency. In such situations, it was necessary to be able to move from a swarm to a stubborn, almost infantry battle for a block, for an alley, for an intersection. But the doctrine of circumvention often suggested circumventing this node too, and it was not always possible to circumvent it. The Allied defense was not uniformly weak. In many areas, the fire was poorly connected, the reserves were late, and the command was arguing over interpretations. However, there were points where a unit of terrain became a defense booster. A stone village on a ridge, blocked by fire several times, a battery hidden in the relief, or a calculation that knew its sector to the bush. The Panzerwaffe, accustomed to panoramas, encountered a corridor battle there. Visibility was short, maneuver was limited, and decisions had to be made in front of the enemy. Technically, the doctrine of interaction compensated for a lot. If anti-tank guns interfered, artillery and sappers were called in. If a counterattack was being prepared, aviation worked at low altitude. If clearing was delayed, Motorized infantry intercepted the flanks and removed minor threats. But any score is vulnerable when several notes fall out at the same time. Low clouds, lack of fuel for advanced vehicles, unexpected fire from the upper terrace of the street, fatigue of the driver mechanics, and now the ideal scheme is stalling and requires different tactics. The very language of the operation encouraged overconfidence. Blitz, maneuver, strike sounded like promises, although they were only tools. The crews absorbed these words as a new ethic. Do not stop. Do not get bogged down. Do not wait for slow artillery preparation. The norm turned into a reflex and helped to achieve success, but at the same time, made any decision related to a pause and dirty assault work unpleasant. Where a pause was mandatory, troops sometimes tried to replace it with another detour, risking losing even more time. Finally, confidence was underpinned by numbers and schedules. The headquarters calculated the probability of failures, the pace of marches, and the norms of transportation. As long as the schedule was kept, the division remained a fist. But graphs don't like unexpected variables. A blocked-up bridge, a daytime fire in a narrow neighborhood, an impenetrable armored mask of a rare tank, or just a queue at a ferry where every car loses an extra 10 minutes. Several of these little things added up to a loss of pace, and the loss of pace destroyed the emotional support of the entire system. That is why the Chronicle of May cannot be reduced to a straight arrow on the map. It's more like a pulse, ups and downs, accelerations, and sudden pauses. In those places where the defense was prepared and the terrain favored the defender, the panoramic style was replaced by close combat. It turned out that the belief in the predestination of victory is just a mirror of previous experience. Reality took its toll. Sometimes it was an hour of extra work. Sometimes it was a whole day lost at an inconspicuous height or village, which was estimated on the map as a checkpoint. Stonne is a small village south of Sedan, on a ridge that controls the exits from the Ardennes to the plains of Champagne. Here, in a narrow patch between the Mont-Dieu forest and undulating fields, in the spring of 1940, two logics of war collided. The German belief in continuous pace and the French reliance on armor, fire, and terrain. From May 15th to May 17th, this ridge changed hands so many times that the chronicles argue about the exact number. But they agree on the main thing. The pace died in the cramped streets, and the village turned into a hub where one tank could suddenly become a fortress. The relief explains a lot. Stonne stands on a ledge. The approaches are shot from the flanks, and the ascents are divided into short steps. Any advance here had to either break into, house after house, or grope for rare gaps between hedges, in which the calculations of anti-tank guns were hidden. For the doctrine of circumvention, this place is a trap. The maneuver tightens into narrow streets. The surveillance is corridor. The firing positions are short and rigid, and the commander's decision was made almost at the intersection, where only the next house is visible. The composition of the forces looked like this. On the German side, units of the 10th Panzer Division and the Grossdeutschland Regiment, reinforced with artillery and assault aircraft. On the French side are units of the 3rd Light Mechanized and 3rd Heavy Tank Divisions, infantry, and most importantly, battalions of heavy tanks, Char B1 bis. These vehicles were not fast, but they were tenacious. Up to 60 millimeters of armor in front, a short-barreled 75 millimeter cannon in the hull to suppress firing points, and a 47 millimeter rapid-firing cannon in the turret against armored targets. On paper, they did not fit into the Blitz. In practice, it was their stability and firepower that broke the pace. The morning of May 15th began with a German attempt to remove the crest by pressure. The columns, under the cover of pieces and smoke, reached the outskirts, but ran into short sectors of fire. Several successfully advanced French guns and fire from fortified houses tore the first bunch. The Germans reformed and entered courtyard after courtyard, taking advantage of every few meters of the street. The French infantry retreated to the next step, dragging the enemy to where the tanks were already being prepared. By noon, the village had changed hands for the first time, and almost immediately the rollback began. Several B1 bis, coming out of the woods at close range, literally pushed the infantry and light tanks back. From May 15th to May 16th, the battle took on a pulsating character. Infantry was gaining ground. Artillery was trying to suppress invisible positions. Aviation was catching gaps in the clouds and working in short raids. German 37 millimeter anti-tank guns left marks on the B1 bis armor at point-blank range, without turning them into holes. Upon discovering this, the crews tried to hit the sides at an angle or summon heavier weapons. 88mm guns were also used, where they could be rolled up and positioned along the street axis. But it was not always possible to bring these guns to a favorable position. Any turn of the tractor under fire was too expensive. The morning of May 16 was a textbook moment for both sides. In a narrow cluster of streets, a heavy B1 bis with its own name, Eure, under the command of Captain Pierre Bilot, hit a column that had already begun to turn around. A frontal hull-mounted 75mm destroyed positions and covering vehicles, and a 47mm turret cannon picked up targets that were momentarily set up at intersections. In response, the German shells landed one after the other, but ricocheted or stuck in the armor without fatal effect. The result of the raid became legendary. In a matter of minutes, the column lost several tanks and guns. The street turned into a blockage, and the entire offensive momentum in this direction collapsed. The debate about the final figures is irrelevant to the point. The psychological effect was huge. Why did it work? First, the distance. In Stonne, the battle was fought for such short periods that the low muzzle velocity of the French 75mm cannon ceased to be a problem, and its high explosive effect, on the contrary, was fully revealed. Secondly, the geometry of the streets and slopes. The machine could cut off the sector by turning the hull, align the hull cannon with tracks and fire up the steps of the built-up street. Thirdly, the psychological factor. The opponent, accustomed to quickly pushing through light obstacles, lost the rhythm for seconds, and in a tight space these seconds were enough for one heavy machine to impose its pace. But the French Caterpillar Fortress had strict limits. The B1 bis is voracious in fuel and difficult to maintain. Its commander is overloaded with tasks, 47mm guidance, surveillance, communications, and the interaction of the hull and turret guns required a delicate crew coordination. At long range, in an open field, and under fire from advanced 88mm guns, such a machine proved vulnerable. German sappers quickly increased the density of smoke, transferred heavy guns to the dominant points, and began to dig out the defense node like a pillbox, with successive leads, fire economy, and flank cutting. Day 16 ended with the village changing hands again. At night, both sides moved guns, set up medical posts, and assembled disparate groups. By the morning of the 17th, the Germans had brought in additional funds. More infantry fighting vehicles, more mortars, and crews who knew every yard. The French lacked infantry cover and time. The operational picture around Sedan deteriorated, and a stubborn fight for one ridge became a luxury that the front could no longer afford. During the day, the Germans, losing men and vehicles, but not slowing down the rhythm of fire, finally took off the tank, taking control of key approaches. Basically, the Stonne is a tactical school on 1 square kilometer. The Germans were inoculated against the illusion of an omnipotent pace, and learned a set of practical techniques. 88mm for heavy targets, precise engineering support in close combat, splitting tasks to a house crossroads, a smoke-fire jerk combination. The French were convinced that heavy armor in the right environment could disrupt an offensive, but also that one successful battle did not solve the campaign. With a lack of communications, infantry, and time, even a fortress would not hold the ridge indefinitely. The myth of the weakness of French tanks has also been cracked. In Stonne, their weakness turned out to be not in the armor and not in the guns, but in the system. In the shortage of radio communications at the platoon, company level, in the overload of the tower commander, in logistics, and in the overall operational picture, where neighboring areas were already sagging. A single B1 bis could reverse the logic of the battle on its street in an hour, but it could not cancel a breakthrough tens of kilometers to the south and north. And yet it is precisely such episodes that do not simplify the story to the arrows on the map. Here you can see how a local caterpillar fortress can cost the enemy a day and nerves. For a documentary article, it is important to show the Stonne not as a miracle episode, but as a concentration of factors: relief, fire density, equipment design, crew psychology, and the inertia of doctrine. The photos show cramped courtyards, broken windows, low mortar bursts. The reports contain short phrases about impenetrability and blockage on the street. There is a human scale between them. A driver who holds a cannon with his body. a 37mm calculation that does not leave, although the tracers are useless. A messenger who crawls over with a coil of cable because the air is clogged. These details provide an explanation for why German self-confidence failed here. So, Stonne is about the coincidence of circumstances and the ultimate manifestation of the properties of technology and people. The German war machine did not break down here. It lost momentum, switched from a march to an assault, and paid with time and losses for every street break. The French armor did not win the campaign here. It proved that a well-chosen environment turns an individual tank into a nodal point of defense. In the next chapter, we'll narrow the focus even more and break down the Eure raid by the minute to understand how one crew managed to rewrite the course of an entire regiment's battle for half an hour. The morning of the 16th of May begins not with the command, "Go ahead," but with a short radio phrase. The village is still half covered in smoke. Wet clay glistens on the slopes. The Eure, a heavy Char B1 bis, stands in the lowlands and waits for the flow of orders to subside for a moment. Captain Pierre Bilot, the commander, gunner, and nerve of the machine, rests his shoulders against the turret. His 47mm cannon is ready. At the bottom, the mechanic is revving up to catch the tip of the 75mm case through the hydraulic drive. The route is clear only in the first approximation. Along a stone wall, a short climb to the intersection, then going to the right under a gentle slope, where the street turns into a narrow shaft of fences and facades. Any extra minute works against the French. The column will have time to insert the plug itself. Bilot nods to the mechanic, and the Eure starts moving, swallowing the first step of the ascent. The geometry sets the first point of contact. At the edge of the intersection, where the street breaks at a right angle, there is an anti-tank gun. It waits for a silhouette from the main road, but receives a landmine in the facade of the house, from where the cable stretches to the position. Brick and glass fall on the calculation. The sector is covered with dust. That's what the 75mm case is made for. Breaking knots. The mechanic pushes the car half a body forward, brings the body down, and the second shot completes the job. Then there is a short battle with the first armored target. At the exit from the alley, a troika is shown for seconds. The 47mm takes aim at the passageway. The armor piercing goes into the turret box, and the German car squats. A jet of fire flashes in the right window of the second floor. There is a flamethrower or bottles of gasoline. The hull 75 responds to the facade. The brick falls down. The window goes out. The street seems to be clear, but from the left shadow, a cue slides across the armor. There is another gun nearby. The ice rinks rattled against the wall. Another target. But the 37th ones were working earlier. These guns are used to light French cars and to the inevitable stops on tight turns. They hit at point-blank range and expect the armor to give up. 1. Second and third projectiles arrive by Eure. There is a thick ringing on the steel, but there is no penetration. The crews are trying to board, changing points and calling for tractors. The mechanic steers, holding the body just enough so that the 70 heel remains in the axle. The raid is gaining momentum. The hull cannon works like a hammer, on walls, on light escort vehicles. The 47 tower is like a chisel, stingy shots at targets that pop out from behind houses. On the radio, they ask to cover the turn. You can see how the neighboring French tank goes to the side, leaving the Eure at the tip. But now the enemy column is helping itself. The lead car is standing. The tail is already braking, and the street is turning into a traffic jam. Aviation almost does not interfere. Clouds and smoke cover the roof of the village. You have to play by infantry rules. House, flight, yard. At the middle intersection, Eure gets caught in the crossfire. On the right is a 37mm. On the left is a larger offset cannon. By the sound, 50mm at direct fire. To stop is to give up geometry. Bilot decides to hit the hull on the left, then cut off the right with a turret. The maneuver succeeds, but at that moment hits are hitting the armor like an orchestra, and one of the machine gun belts snaps. There is a narrow pocket along the stone fence, where there is a German car with a short barrel, probably an early PZ-4. He tries to turn the tower around, but the angle is bad. The caterpillars are digging a hole. Bilot, without changing his pace, puts the armor piercing into the cheek of the tower. The German tank goes out. The second car, trapped in the shadow of the first, helplessly pushes its side. A moment breaks up the formation completely. The tail of the column still believes in movement. The head is already blocked. The radio is hoarse. Orders are given with gestures. The mechanic responds by rocking the body. The visors produce narrow, jagged sectors. A flash in one window, a caterpillar in another, and the silhouette of a flamethrower on the roof. This kinetics needs to be folded into one line, and it crumbles with every shake. The only way is to keep moving and hit the knots. The raid lasts less than an hour, but accommodates a melee course. Everything is on the eye here. The distances are short. The sights are lost from vibration. The targeting is a nod. The most important thing is not to freeze. Where the Eure could freeze at an ideal point, it prefers to crawl with its body, trimming the firing line with millimeters. To an observer, this looks like a stubborn push. The tank pushes the street into itself. For the enemy, it's like a target that can't be caught in the sights for the right fraction of a second. Enemy losses remain a matter of dispute. Some reports speak of a dozen or more damaged cars, others, fewer. But more important is the collapse of the offensive on this axis. The column lost momentum. The gun crews were cut off. The sappers could not bring the smoke screens. Attempts to introduce the 88mm choked on the approach. There was neither a platform nor time. When Eure bursts out of the cramped mine of the streets, the air is sharper. It smells of red-hot iron and moist earth raised by explosions. Balot checks the situation. The roof is still smoking on the left. A stretcher flashes in front. It's pointless to climb further. The rubble is such that neither your own nor others will pass quickly. The car takes up a cover position. The crew checks the fasteners, tries to revive the radio. The result of the raid is measured in 3 quantities. First, time. The enemy has lost a precious half hour or an hour. Secondly, psychology. The belief that the heavy was being crushed from above cracked. The commanders had to relearn how to take corners and spans. Thirdly, through practice, it became clear that against heavy armor in close combat, not only caliber is needed, but also geometry. Flanks, heights, platforms. For the French, this hour is a coincidence of technique, relief, and character. Char B1 bis is slow and voracious in the open field. It has found an environment in stone. At short distances, the 75mm hull turns into scrap, and turning the hull through a hydraulic drive allows you to shoot targets step by step. Yes, an overloaded commander is an Achilles heel. Yes, the radio is weak. Yes, the overall picture of the war has not changed. But locally, one crew turned the street into a time factor, and time in the spring of the 40s is more expensive than fuel. Another invisible participant in the raid is the mechanic of the car itself. The precise hydraulic rotation of the hull gives the guidance system the filigree that is usually expected from the turret. The driver controls not only the movement, but also the 75mm fire. The radio operator combines communication and feed tapes. The tower commander holds the sight and review. The load is monstrous, but it is the consistency of these roles that turns a heavy tank into a fortress on tracks. Later, they will argue about the numbers and types of damaged vehicles, about how many hits the Eure took. It is important not to lose the scale. Close combat is not about statistics, but about habits. Move while the enemy only intends to. Hit the knots, not the silhouettes. Decide without pause. These habits were the secret of the raid. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a lesson for both sides. In the evening, when the smoke is thinning on the ridge, the Eure is no longer a legend, but a tired car with chipped paint and dark circles from touching metal. The crew gets out cautiously, as if the earth could also respond with a shot. Nearby, an officer writes dry lines in a notebook. The street is held. The attempt is thwarted. Maybe tomorrow everything will start all over again, with the same walls and a different outcome. But this hour will remain as a model. How a single heavy tank with a properly functioning crew can rewrite the course of an entire unit's battle at a short distance. La Ferte is the westernmost fortification node on this section of the Maginot line, a small fortification complex with 2 combat units connected by an underground gallery, casemates, diesel engines, filters, and barracks deep in the slope. His main strength is not the thickness of the concrete itself, but his involvement in the network. Blocking the fire of neighbors, telephone and field cables, artillery hands behind. In May of the 40th, the net around him breaks. After the breakthrough at Sedan, the Germans closed the roads and heights, and by May 15th, La Ferte was transformed from a hub into an island surrounded by slopes from which every hood and every embrasure could be seen. Inside, Everything is set up like a survival factory. There are combat rooms at the top, machine, gun emplacements, anti-storm embrasures, observation hoods. Below are the services, diesels, batteries, fans, filters, pumps, kitchen, infirmary. Even deeper are the barracks, and a long, damp, cool gallery that connects the blocks and leads to the underground entrance. The schedule is well honed. Shifts at posts, air dosimetry by the standards of the time, filtration checks, electricity-saving schedules. The garrison is used to living by the clock and by teams, where any failure is compensated by a backup scheme. For the first 2 days, the enemy's presence is felt as pressure, but not as an assault. Observers are spreading out along the side heights. Sappers are approaching in the hollows. Tractors with long trunks are pulling up on the roads. The artillery tries out the calibers and ranges. The aim falls on the slopes, then closer, along the traverses and roofs. The hoods are ringing, the periscopes are cracking, but the system is still holding on. Filters are driving air. Phones are working intermittently. Calculations are jamming the rare attempts of the enemy to probe the dead zones. The garrison understands. This is not a random shootout, but a methodical preparation. By May 17, the Germans had captured the dominant points, and La Ferté was visible from above. From that moment on, every activity is visible. Changing the post, opening the armored door, trying to take out a box of ammunition. The enemy brings large caliber guns to direct fire, adds heavy mortars and pulls up sappers with shaped charges. The sound of the fight is changing. Instead of thuds on the roof, there are sharp jabs on the hoods, blows on the embrasures, shaking the internal pillars. Ventilation is running at its limit. Smooth metal rattles in the halls of diesels, and mechanics listen to the engines like a doctor with a stethoscope, afraid to miss a false note. Radio communication is unreliable, and cables are constantly cut by fragments or sagging from short circuits. Neighbors respond less frequently than we would like. Artillery umbrellas open with a delay. The garrison commander chooses conservative tactics. Avoid demonstrative fire where it is detected. Save ammunition for close assault attempts, and maintain surveillance and reports. This is the correct science of fortified areas. But it works as long as the node remains a node, not a single point. On the afternoon of May 18th, a systematic assault begins. Surveillance is turned off, from different azimuths in turn. Periscopes are smashed, armored columns are hit, and welds are loosened. Several hits fall dangerously close to the air ducts. In one of the blocks, the fastening of the blinds is displaced. The enemy uses smoke and dust as weapons. It blocks the view, lures the opening of fire, and fixes the location of the embrasures by flashes. Sappers crawl to the concrete and attach charges to the joints of metal and stone. When the cumulative hits deep inside, it doesn't look like an explosion inside, but a painful jolt, after which you can hear how hot it starts to breathe from the cracks. The garrison, following the instructions, shrinks. The extra people are taken below. Only calculations and signalmen remain at the top. Engineers run between diesels and switchboards. Alternative ventilation branches are being launched, and some of the valves are blocked so as not to draw smoke from the outside. It's all a struggle for minutes. An emergency shutdown is triggered in one of the communal rooms. A spark, soot, a pungent smell of burning. The fire is extinguished quickly, but in a closed system, even a short flash is a blow to the air balance. Closer to the night of the 18th, the Germans raise the pressure by another notch. Spider-like patterns of cracks appear on the roofs of the blocks. When hit, the interior decoration crumbles with transparent dust. Several times, an attempt to open the armored door slightly in order to remove an infantry group ends with a direct gift hitting the door in response. A rotating ring is wedged in one of the hoods. The observer remains in the iron drum as in a well, where each sound lives separately from him. Psychologically, this is a turning point. You stop believing that iron is a shield, and you find yourself listening to the fans as your last ally. By midnight on May 19th, the situation becomes borderline. The pressure of artillery and explosions disrupts the tightness in several areas. The filters get more work than they were designed for, and the diesel engines draw in air that already contains combustion products and fine dust. Gorenya. A fire breaks, out somewhere at the junction of the cable manhole and the transverse corridor. The fire is small, but it is enough to increase the production of carbon monoxide. People in gas masks feel that it has not become easier. These masks do not save from fumes. The attendants are trying to redesign the ventilation scheme, but each opening of the door changes the gas dynamics for seconds, and the smoke draws in deeper. Realizing that the top is actually lost, the commander gives the order to gain a foothold below, close the extra doors, and keep in touch until the last. Engineers are frantically checking the wiring and looking at the ammeters. The hands are twitching jerkily. In one of the compartments, people lie down directly on the concrete to catch the coolness of the floor and save their breath. The heat rises faster than it seems. Someone else jokes about sleeping in the basement. But after a few minutes, the words no longer add up to a joke. The fans are pulling, but the system has become a vicious circle. It carefully distributes what should not be in these walls. The Germans do not know what is going on inside, and they continue to methodically turn off what else is responding. Several attempts to roll out the 88mm closer to direct fire are replaced by lateral positions. They hit the perimeter so as not to substitute calculations. Sappers are working on the doors of the auxiliary entrances, checking the responses, putting new charges. But the outcome has already been decided, not by the explosion outside, but by the chemistry of the air inside. By the morning of May 19th, La Ferté is silent. When the assault teams enter the blocks, they find silence, and people lying where they sought safety. At the doors, at the fans, at the stairs. In the gallery, there are scenes of motionless evacuation. Stretchers pushed against the wall, empty flasks, screwdrivers at switchboards, a lamp lit and extinguished. The death of La Ferté is not about weak concrete or almighty guns. It's about a node being pulled out of the network. The fortification was conceived as a system of mutual cover, where a single unit should not be left alone for more than a few hours. Here the hours stretched into the night, and the night ended with chemistry, which the defense of the 40s had not yet been able to defeat. The enemy needed guns, sappers, and heights. The garrison needed air, which was gone. The lessons are cruel and precise. Firstly, elevations and side observation posts are more important than centimeters of armor. Dominating the roof of a casemate turns any armor, even undead armor, into vulnerable armor. Secondly, the engineering means of the assault, cumulates, smoke, work on air ducts and valves, turn out to be no less decisive than the caliber. Thirdly, isolation kills slowly but surely. Cable breakage, delayed artillery responses, the inability of neighbors to counterattack. All this adds up to a spiral where heroism squeezes out only extra hours, not salvation. For a documentary article, it is important to show La Ferté from the inside, not as an abstract DOT on a map, but as an organism. The pulse of this organism is the work of diesel engines. Breathing is ventilation. The nervous system is cables and speaking tubes. When nerves are severed and lungs are injured, muscles can still twitch, but the body is already doomed. That's how this node died, following the routine to the end, registering hits to the last and saving bullets, but losing in the place where the War of the 40s was just learning to count. In the gas dynamics of enclosed spaces, and in the ability to maintain a network in conditions of a maneuverable enemy. Still, La Ferté wasn't useless. He cost the enemy time, effort, and nerves, forced them to deploy heavy weapons under remote supervision, and disrupted a simple push and bypass scheme. Like Stonne, this episode shows the price of local nodes. They do not change the outcome of the campaign, but they change its pace, and pace is the currency of the Blitzkrieg. Where the pace drops by a day, the map around begins to redraw. In the May days of the 40s, this was not enough. But it is precisely such points that have left lessons in the memory of both sides, according to which new instructions will soon be written, both for assault and for defense. When the dust of battle settles, it's not the slogans that remain, but the cause and effect links. Episodes like the Moaning or the Death of La Ferté show that the fortress is not so much concrete and millimeters of armor as the right environment, network, and time. France was not saved by a single point in May-June of the 40th, because the scrapping occurred at a higher level, at the junction of operational tempo, management, logistics, and the strategic picture. Below are the lessons that grew out of these days and the myths that should be shelved. The first lesson: tempo is the currency of the maneuver war. The Germans turned hours and kilometers into a measurable resource. Whoever has the pace has the initiative. Whoever has the initiative has the choice of the place and time of the battle. The French system as a whole was tailored to the right battle: deployment, artillery preparation, consolidation, counterattack. It worked well at the nodes, but there were gaps between the nodes, and it was through them that the main stream of impact went. The fortress is capable of burning enemy clocks, but if there is no one to pull up the neighbors, the enemy compensates for the loss of time in neighboring directions and returns with an enlarged fist. The second lesson. The network is more important than the node. Fortification and heavy armor are revealed only as elements of the system. Overlapping sectors, backup communication lines, live counterattacks on the flanks, uninterrupted artillery support. La Ferté died not because the concrete was wrong, but because the knot was torn from its bonds. Stonne held on while someone else was fighting on his flanks. Any fortress without a network is a safe without an alarm system. Thicker walls mean longer break-ins, but the end is a foregone conclusion. The third lesson is that governance must be decentralized. The success of the panzer divisions was underpinned by a culture of assignments, where the unit commander received a goal rather than a detailed script. The radio in each tank turned the order into a movement in minutes. The French system often required procedures and confirmations that ate up precious segments, where the commander on the spot could not change the scheme without the approval of a neighbor or a battery. The initiative slipped away. In close combat, it was expressed in small things. Who is the first to change the axis of attack at the intersection? Who takes on the risk of turning under fire? Who calls fire on the bell and not on schedule? The fourth lesson. Aviation and engineers are not support, but accomplices. Dive, bomber strikes, smoke, bridge laying, and sapper groups are not additions to tanks, but equal tools that make the pace possible. Without them, the armor gets stuck on the bridge, the column becomes a target, and the assault rests on the first reinforced concrete tooth. In May, the Germans showed how to combine the fire of the sky and the work of the earth, so that any fragment of resistance is either blinded, bypassed, or cut at the seams. The French engineering units and the Air Force acted courageously, but not always synchronously with the ground pulse, and the effect was nullified. Fifth lesson. A technique is a set of properties that must be applied correctly. The Char B1 bis is excellent in close-range, step-by-step combat. Its 75mm breaks knots, 47mm knocks out armor targets at short range, and the armor holds the 37th. But it's hard for him in the open. Communication overloads the commander. Fuel consumption and maintenance complexity take time. The reverse is true for the PZ-34 early series. They are weaker head-on against a heavy tank and pillbox, but faster, simpler, better connected, more convenient for the swarm. It's not the best car that wins, but the best layout of properties with terrain, time, and task. Sixth lesson. Psychology must be included in the plan. Both a Frenchman and a German see the same thing on a nearby street. Dust, guns, silhouettes, but interpret it differently. The German tempo broke down where the expectation of a quick result collided with a viscous battle. The French will collapsed where local success did not find support from the right and left. Hence the power and danger of legends. 1 hour of Eure inspires, but does not negate the environment. One silent hood demoralizes, although the neighboring block still holds. Now, the myths. Myth 1. The Maginot line was useless. Wrong. Where the network remained a network, fortification restrained, redirected, and increased the cost of any breakthrough. She became useless alone, when going around turned the node into an island. The mistake is not in the concrete, but in the assumption that the stone itself will hold the space in the era of maneuver and radio. The correct conclusion is not concrete is bad, but concrete is an element, not a fastener of the entire front. Myth 2. France lost because of cowardice. Insulting oversimplification. At the level of tactical episodes, the French infantry, gunners, and tankers fought stubbornly, and sometimes textbook. The loss resulted from delays, interruptions, out of sync, errors in assessing the main direction, overloaded control channels, and not from a lack of personal courage. Where the system converged, the battle was hard. Where it disintegrated, courage burned out without leverage. The third myth. Blitzkrieg is magic against which there is no method. There are techniques, and they can be seen as early as May. Filtering radio discipline and camouflage, joint counterstrikes, dense air defense, engineering barriers in depth, prepared nodes with the possibility of maneuvering reserves, hard points, with pre-calculated gas dynamics, mobile artillery on tractors, a unified communication network from the battalion to aviation. In the 40s, France did not have time to pull these elements into one bundle. Later, the Allies would do it. From Tunisia to Normandy. Myth 4. The French tanks were weaker than the German ones. In a head-on comparison of characteristics, this is too rough. The B1 bis and Somua S-35 outperformed their opponents in a number of parameters, but they were limited in organization. Radio communications, number and training of crews, logistics, repair chains, and fire control. German tanks did not win with millimeters or a separate miracle cannon, but by being integrated into an elastic control and support network. The power of the machine was revealed through the power of the system. Myth 5. If the fortresses had been held, everything would have turned out differently. The fortresses held out, some of them to the end, but the outcome of the campaign was decided at the level of operational corridors, at crossings, on deployment, at the pace of transportation, at the joints of buildings. Local nodes change the speed, price, and mood, but they don't change the geography of the impact. To do otherwise, earlier decisions were needed. A different concentration of reserves, a more stringent counterstrike doctrine, a different configuration of communications and air defense, a different priority of motorization. What conclusions are useful to the author of the documentary article? First, to show multi-levelness. Next to the episode, put a supply map, the rhythm of radio networks, and a schedule for moving reserves. Secondly, do not fetishize metal. Millimeters are important, but they are only a parameter in the equation of relief, visibility, time, and psychology. Thirdly, to work with a human scale. An engineer at the diesel engine, a radio operator at the console, a gunner in the fog of the site. These people are the fortress. Fourthly, to unravel the legends, to distinguish the confirmed from the beautiful, leaving the myths with their educational rather than evidentiary value. Finally, the main synthesis. Fortress is a metaphor for resilience, but resilience does not exist without adaptation. Where France was assembling the elements at the moment, the groaning, the individual nodes of the line, the German machine was losing its breath. Where the elements diverged, the pace of the Wehrmacht turned the map into a series of quick decisions, and each delay multiplied. It was not courage versus fear, or concrete versus speed that won, but a way of acting in which all the links worked in unison. If you look for morality, it is simple and difficult. To prepare not points, but connections. Not to wait for the perfect moment, but to create it at a pace. Not to rely on the magic of properties, but to choose the environment for properties. The caterpillar fortress and the concrete block are equally valuable when they are integrated into the network and play their own note in the score. And they are equally powerless when the music is cut off. May 1940 left this knowledge on the cold concrete of the casemates and on the steel of the armored plates, as a warning to everyone who would later build defenses against the war, where minutes are more expensive than kilometers.